Hello and welcome. In this session, we will be exploring the topic of physical security and legal preparedness, why it matters, what it really means in practice, and how we can apply it in our everyday work and lives. This training is designed especially for human rights defenders and activists, but the principles apply to anyone who wants to stay safe, protect their spaces, and continue their work with confidence. So let's get started. Before we dive into strategies and practices, it is important to start with the basics. What exactly do we mean by physical security? When we talk about physical security, we mean freedom from risk or harm that comes from violence or intentional acts, things that directly affect our safety or well being, or even our property. It's not just about having locks on doors or security guards in place. Physical security is really a set of processes and measures designed to protect us from physical threats. And here's something very important: physical security doesn't stand on its own, it's deeply connected to other aspects of safety, to digital security, legal preparedness, media safety, or even emotional well being. When we strengthen one, it often strengthens the others too. Strong physical security lowers the chances of an incident disrupting our work, but just as importantly, it reduces stress and helps us stay more effective in what we do every day. There are three main layers to keep in mind. First, personal safety. These are strategies we can each adopt, like being aware of our surroundings, spotting potential dangers, setting up regular check ins with someone that we trust, or having a clear communication plan in case of emergencies. Second, secure travel. This is about planning ahead, learning the context of the country or region we're moving through, and always having backup plans if things don't get as expected. And finally, safe spaces. These are environments that provide privacy, protection, and peer support. Creating and maintaining these spaces is a vital part of building resilience within our movements and communities. So, when we think about physical security, it's not just about avoiding harm, it's about creating conditions that allow us to work, to live, and to thrive safely. So now that we understand what physical security is and why it's important, let's take a look at the other side of the equation. What happens when it's harmed or compromised? Physical security is considered harmed when the spaces we depend on, our homes, offices, or meeting areas, can no longer protect us from the threats, or when there is a direct threat or actual damage to our safety and well being. Sometimes this harm is very practical and visible, like an authorized person gaining access to a building, a broken lock that no one has fixed, poor lighting outside an office, or the complete absence of an emergency plan. Other times, it's more targeted, especially for human rights defenders and activists. It might look like being placed under surveillance, having your office raided by police, being confronted by violent counter protesters, or realizing you're being followed. The truth is, no protection system can completely eliminate risk. Threats will always exist, but strong, consistent security measures can dramatically reduce those risks. They help close the gaps that make us more vulnerable in the first place. And it's very important to remember security isn't just about having equipment or technology, it's about whether we can truly stay safe, whether we're visible and public, or trying to keep a low profile in more hostile environments. Here's a quick example. Imagine a security camera installed outside of an office. On the surface, it looks like protection, but no one is actually monitoring that footage or if the feed is being accessed by hostile actors. So then the camera gives a false sense of security. And in some cases, that illusion of safety can leave us even more exposed to harm. And we need to remember that physical violence against human rights defenders is often not random. It usually represents the last stage in a sequence of escalating threats. That is why it's important to understand and address the broader context. Using a holistic approach that combines physical, digital, psychological, media, and legal preparedness, by doing this, activists and their allies can reduce risks and respond more effectively. Now, how to react to direct physical attacks? When facing a direct physical attack, the very first thing is to stay calm and alert. I know that's easier said than done, but panic can actually increase your risk. If you can, focus on slowing your breathing and quickly taking in your surroundings. If there is a chance to leave safely, prioritize escape over confrontation. Getting out of the area is always safer than trying to fight back. This is why it is so important to know in advance where the safe spaces are, whether that's a trusted home, a nearby NGO office, or even a clinic. Avoid provocation. Even when you're being confronted or intimidated, try to stay non confrontational. Engaging aggressively, especially with authorities or hostile actors, can escalate the situation and put you in risk. Also, when facing these threats, remember that our support network can be a lifeline. Call or text a trusted contact right away. Or, if you can't speak openly, use a pre-arranged code word to signal that you are in danger. This is why it's so important to set those systems up before anything happens. Another key point is to know your rights. If you're arrested or harassed, stay calm, clearly state your name, and request legal representation. What you want to avoid is resisting violently, because that can escalate the situation and put you at a greater risk. And if the situation turns physical, the goal is to protect your most vital areas. Cover your head and organs, stay low as possible, and if you can, move toward cover, anything that shields you from further harm. If you are detained, the first step is to ask calmly, why are you being held? You have the right to know. Never sign anything you don't understand. Documents can sometimes be used against you, so it's better to refuse than to sign under pressure without clarity. While this is happening, do your best to observe and remember details names, badges, numbers, or any identifying features of the people detaining you. These details can be very important later. And once you're safe, document the incident as soon as you can. Write down what happened, the time, the place, who was involved, and whether there was witnesses. If it's secure to do so, photos or videos can also strengthen your account. After an incident, one of the most important steps is to seek medical care. Even if your injuries feel minor, small wounds can become serious without treatment. And medical records also serve as a form of documentation of what happened. The next step is to report and connect. Let your organizational movement know and reach out to legal aid networks or human rights coalitions. By sharing your experience, you strengthen collective protection. Others can step in to support, and patterns of abuse become harder to ignore. If you choose to go public with your story, always assess the risks first. Do that together with your team or allies so you can make an informed decision about safety and impact. And finally, use the experience to review or establish security protocols. The goal is not just to respond after the fact, but to prevent further attacks and reduce your vulnerability in the future. It is important to know how to react when risks take place, but most importantly, Adopting a preventative approach is the key to our safety. Prevention is always stronger than reaction. The first step is to conduct regular risk assessments. Ask yourself, who might target me? Why and how? It could be authorities, corporations, or even local opposition groups. By understanding the potential threats, you can better prepare. It's also important to identify high risk locations and events. Certain places or gatherings naturally carry more danger, and being aware of that allows you to plan your approach more carefully. Next, think about your movements. Avoid failing into predictable routines. For example, always leaving the office at the same time or taking the same route home. When your movements are predictable, it makes it easier for someone to track or target you. And finally, share your movements only with trusted contacts. A simple check in and check out system when traveling or attending events can be a lifesaver. It creates accountability and ensures that someone always knows if you don't return as expected. Another layer of prevention is how we move and how we prepare our environment. Whenever possible, travel with trusted allies. Avoid moving alone, especially at night or through isolated areas. Community networks or safe transport arrangements can make a huge difference in reducing risk. Knowing your environment is very important. Before any public action or meeting, identify where the safe exits are, where you could take cover if necessary, and where nearby help might be found. Also, take time to understand the local context, which areas are heavily surveilled or where incidents have happened before. And finally, sometimes prevention means limiting our own exposure. That includes avoiding sharing sensitive plans or locations online and being cautious with media interviews or social media posts that could attract unwanted attention. Staying visible is important for activism, but staying safe is what keeps the work going. Prevention also means looking beyond ourselves and building strong community relationships. When we engage with local leaders, elders, or religious figures, they can sometimes offer protection or help mediate in intense situations. Being rooted in your community adds a layer of safety because, in some contexts, visibility itself can be a form of protection. It's equally important to strengthen security in places where we gather. For meetings, control who enters the space and make sure you know who's in the room. Designate someone to quietly watch for suspicious activity so others can focus on the meeting itself. And one simple but powerful step is to avoid always meeting in the same location. Changing venues reduces predictability and lowers the chances of being targeted. Prevention isn't only about personal habits or where we meet. It's also about who you can call and how well you prepare as a group. First, coordinate with legal and emergency support networks. Know exactly who to call if things go wrong. Human rights lawyers, rapid response teams, trusted journalists, or medical contacts. Keep those numbers saved in more than one place. And when possible, memorize the top two so they are immediately available under stress. Secondly, stay informed and stay alert. Monitor the situation around planned events or campaigns and take extra precautions when tensions are high. If you notice signs you're being watched or followed, report it to your network and adjust your plans. Change routes, postpone meetings, or increase your security presence. And finally, invest in regular safety training. Practical skills, first aid, de escalation techniques, digital safety basics, and emergency response are worth rehearsing. run scenarios drills, and rehearse evacuation plans so responses become muscle memory, then improvise decisions at the moment of crisis. Together, these steps build a more resilient group, legal backstops, active situation awareness, and practiced response make a real difference in preventing and mitigating attacks. Now, let's explore together the legal aspects that we should take into consideration and why it matters. As mentioned in the previous slides, when we prepare for potential safety or legal challenges before they happen, we can often prevent harm entirely or significantly reduce its impact. It's much easier to avoid a dangerous situation than to get out of one once you're in it. Legal knowledge truly is power. When you understand your rights, what you can and cannot legally do, what authorities can and cannot legally demand of you, you are in a strong position to protect yourself and make informed decisions. This knowledge also helps you support others who might not have the same information. Preparedness reduces fear and anxiety. One of the biggest challenges we face as activists is psychological burden of not knowing what might happen or how to respond. When you have plans, when you know your rights, when you've thought through scenarios, you can act with confidence rather than fear. Your individual preparedness protects entire networks and movements. When one person in a group doesn't understand legal procedures or safety protocols, it can put everyone at risk. But when individuals are well prepared, it strengthens the security and effectiveness of the whole collective. Early action prevents escalation. A minor legal issue that's handled quickly and properly often stays minor. But when people don't know how to respond appropriately, small problems can snowball into major crises that consume enormous time, energy, and resources. Safety measures enable sustainable activism. We're not in this work for a short sprint. We're building movements that need to last. Activists who burn out, get seriously hurt, or face major legal consequences often can't continue their work. Preparedness helps ensure we can keep advocating for change over the long term. Legal preparedness saves precious resources. When you know what to do and how to do it quickly, you spend less time, money, and emotional energy dealing with legal or safety crises. You can focus your resources on your actual advocacy work instead of constantly putting out fires. Finally, shared knowledge builds community resilience. When safety and legal preparedness become part of the culture of our movements, entire communities become stronger and more capable of supporting each other through challenges. Remember, the goal isn't to eliminate all risk. That would be impossible in this work. The goal is to be thoughtful, prepared, and strategic about the risks we take so that we can be as effective and sustainable as possible in creating the change we want to see. Let's talk about personal safety fundamentals. The physical security practices that form the foundation of our overall protection. These aren't just for dramatic emergencies. They are about everyday habits that quietly but powerfully keep us safer. Situational awareness means developing the habit of paying attention to what's happening around you. Trust your instincts. If something feels off, it usually is. Our bodies notice danger before our minds can rationalize it. As mentioned, routine variation is crucial for activists and human rights defenders. If you always take the same route to work, meet at the same cafe, or post the same times online, you become predictable. Emergency contacts should be more than just names saved in your phone. Make sure your trusted people also know how to reach each other and that someone always has general idea of where you are, when, and what to expect. This isn't paranoia. It's a practical safety planning. Communication protocols with your team or family build safety nets. Simple habits like regular check ins, using code words to signal danger, or quick I'm okay message can mean the difference between a minor scare and a serious emergency. Document safety is another piece. Keep copies of important documents like IDs, passports, or legal papers stored securely in more than one location. If something happens, you won't lose everything at once. Travel security is also vital. Always plan your routes in advance. Share your itinerary with someone you trust and avoid falling into predictable travel patterns. Even small changes in how and when you move can reduce risk. And finally, personal information protection. In today's world, oversharing can be dangerous. Limit the personal details you share publicly, whether online or offline. Details like your daily schedule, your home location, or your family connections can all be misused if they fall into the wrong hands. So, in summary, these fundamentals aren't complicated. They are about building simple daily habits that strengthen our safety over time and make us harder to target. Now, let's explore security at home because our homes should be our safest spaces. But for activists, home security requires some additional considerations beyond what most people think about. Physical security starts with basics: good locks, adequate lighting, and secure entry. But for us, it also means thinking about privacy measures like curtains or blinds, especially if you host meetings or handle sensitive material at home. Digital security at home includes securing your Wi Fi network with strong passwords and being mindful of where you store devices and sensitive materials. Consider who might have access to your space and what they can see or access. Of course, the document protection is crucial. As mentioned, always keep copies of important documents in secure but accessible locations, like consider having both physical and digital backups. Emergency preparedness might include having a go bag ready with essentials, keeping some emergency cash accessible, and knowing alternative routes out of your home and neighborhood. This isn't about living in fear, it's about being prepared. Visitor protocols helps you maintain security while still being able to host meetings or welcome colleagues at home. Be thoughtful about who you invite into your space and what sensitive materials might be visible. Finally, we need to have this neighborhood awareness as knowing who's around us and who's leaving and moving around is highly important. Workplace security for activists and organizations require a careful balance between accessibility and protection. We want to remain open to the communities we serve while still protecting sensitive information and keeping our teams safe. Office security basics starts with access control, knowing who has the keys or codes to your space, managing visitors properly, and making sure sensitive materials are stored securely when not in use. This could mean log filing cabinets, restricted areas, or clear protocols for handling confidential documents. Meeting security is about choosing the right setting for the right kind of conversation. A public outreach event might not need the same level of protection as a strategy meeting. Always consider who should be in the room, what information is safe to share, and whether participants should be vetted in advance. Equipment protection goes beyond just keeping devices in good condition. It means locking up laptops and phones when they are not in use and securely disposing of sensitive materials. Old hard drives, printed notes, or a discarded draft can contain valuable information for adversaries. Communication security in the workplace means being intentional about how sensitive conversations happen. Use secure lines for important calls. Ensure meeting rooms offer privacy and set clear rules for what can and what can't be discussed over digital channels. Emergency procedures are another crucial layer. All staff and members should know what to do, and drills shouldn't stop at fire safety. Practice how to respond to intrusions, threats, or other security incidents so that people don't freeze under pressure. Information management is about systems. Clean desk policies, document classifications, and access control aren't just bureaucracy. They are practical ways of making sure sensitive information doesn't fall into the wrong hands. And finally, staff and members' security ties everything together. Train your teams, create safe ways to report threats, and build a culture of mutual support. When people know they are protected and backed up, they can do their work with confidence. Let's take a look at the legal risk overview for activists and human rights defenders. Understanding the legal landscape is crucial because as activists, we operate in a complex legal environment where the rules aren't always applied fairly or consistently. Arrest and detention are among the most common legal risks activists face. This can happen during protests, but also at your home, workplace, or during routine activities if authorities decide to target you. Detention can be brief, a few hours, or extended depending on the charges and local legal procedures. Criminal charges can range from minor infractions, like what's called disturbing the public peace, to serious felonies depending on your activities and how authorities choose to interpret them. The same action might be treated very differently in different jurisdictions or political contexts. Civil lawsuits are increasingly used by corporations and wealthy individuals to silence activists through expensive legal proceedings, even when they know they are unlikely to win. These slap suits, strategic lawsuits against public participation, are designed to drain your resources and time. Asset seizure can include confiscation of phones, computers, documents, or even organizational funds. Authorities may claim these are evidence in investigation, but the process of getting them back can be lengthy and difficult. Travel restrictions might include having your passport confiscated, being placed on no fly lists, or what's called travel bans, or facing difficulties at borders. These restrictions can severely impact international advocacy or personal travel. Surveillance and monitoring may or may not be legal depending on your jurisdiction and location, but it's a reality many activists face. This includes both digital surveillance and physical observation of your activities. Administrative penalties can include fines, loss of professional licenses, or other regulatory sanctions that might not be criminal but significantly impact your life and work. Reputation attacks through legal channels like lawsuits that generate negative media coverage are designed to damage your credibility and relationships, even if the legal claims ultimately fail. So, knowing your legal rights is crucial. Your specific legal rights depend entirely on where you are. So, the first and most important step is understanding the laws in your jurisdiction. What I'm sharing are general principles, but you need to research or get legal advice about your specific situation and region. The right to remain silent is fundamental in many legal systems, though it's not universal. Generally, you may be required to provide basic identification, but you don't have to answer questions about your activities, beliefs, or associates. However, how this works in practice varies enormously. The right to legal representation means you should be able to access a lawyer before and during any questioning. In some places, this right is stronger than in others, and the quality of available legal aid varies significantly. The right to no charges means authorities should tell you specifically what law you're accused of breaking. Vague accusations or indefinite detention without clear charges may violate your rights, depending on your jurisdiction, of course. Protection from unreasonable searches varies actually and widely, but generally means there should be some legal justification, like a warrant or a probable cause, before authorities can search your person, belongings, or property. The right to medical attention is especially important for activists who might be injured during arrests or who have ongoing medical needs that require attention, even while in custody. We also advise that you request medical checkup in all cases, a way to document that you entered the detention center or the police station in a good health. So, if something happens later, you request a new checkup, and that is an important proof that you can use to know where and who harmed you. The right to contact support usually means being able to inform someone you trust about your situation, though when and how this happens varies. This is why having an emergency contact and communication plans are very important. Due process protections mean you should receive fair treatment under the law, including timely hearings and appropriate legal procedures. Again, what constitutes fair and timely varies significantly by location. Freedom from cruel treatment is a fundamental human right, though sadly not always respected. Knowing what constitutes abuse can help you document violations and seek appropriate remedies. Remember, knowing your rights is just the first step. You also need to understand how these rights work in practice in your specific context. Interacting with law enforcement as an activist requires a careful balance between protecting your rights and avoiding unnecessary escalation. These skills can make the difference between a minor encounter and a serious legal problem. Staying calm and composed is easier said than done, but it's crucial. Even if you're angry about the situation or treatment you are receiving, maintaining a respectful demeanor protects you legally and practically. Recordings of these interactions can become evidence later. Knowing when to speak and when to remain silent is an art. You generally need to provide basic identification when asked, but beyond that, you have choices about how much to say. Phrases like I'm exercising my right to remain silent or I'd like to speak with a lawyer often are more effective than refusing to respond at all. Documentation is absolutely crucial. Try to note badge numbers, officer names, exact time and location, and identify any witnesses. If you can't write things down immediately, repeat important details to yourself to help remember them. Requesting clarity about your status helps you understand your situation and rights. Ask directly, am I free to leave? If yes, you can walk away. If no, ask, am I under arrest? And what are the charges? This information affects what rights you can exercise. Because asserting rights clearly but non confrontationally means stating your position without arguing about it. Say, I don't consent to this search, rather than physically blocking it. Say, I want to remain silent, rather than debating whether you have to answer those questions or not. Avoiding resistance or escalation is crucial for your safety and legal protection. Physical resistance to police, even when you believe you're the right, almost always makes your situation worse legally and can lead to serious injury. And I cannot get enough of repeating this. Having emergency contacts memorized is essential because your phone might be taken. Memorize at least one or two key numbers of people who can help coordinate legal support, notify your family, or document your situation. Legal observer presence, when possible, provides crucial protection. If you know you're going into a situation where police contact is likely, Try to ensure someone is present who can witness and document what happens. And finally, follow up documentation should happen as soon as possible after any interaction. Write down everything you remember while it's still fresh, because those information can be crucial for any legal proceedings or accountability efforts later. Remember, the goal isn't just to win arguments with police officers on the street. The goal is to protect yourself legally and physically so you can continue your important advocacy.
Now we are going to be assessing physical risks. And what does this mean? We are going to be looking at risk assessments. What is a risk assessment? So, a risk assessment is a systematic process which we use to identify threats that could negatively impact our lives as activists in the work we do. And once we identify these threats, then we analyze and evaluate the threats. Once we have analyzed and evaluated the threats, this helps us to prioritize the risks that could potentially harm us or our communities. And this prioritization is through the scoring method, where we score the likelihood and impact, which will enable us to prioritize. We're going to look at this further in subsequent slides. Now, the goal of a risk assessment is to understand the risks that we are facing, to identify where to minimize these risks the most and where the most impact occurs. Now, it's important to know that there are different types of risks, and these different types of risks include personal, organizational, logistical, reputational, and digital. But we are going to be focusing on personal and organizational because this is what concerns us directly. Now, we're going to look at the risk assessment and how we conduct it, or how we do the scoring as mentioned. The first step is to use a consistent rating scale. Now we're going to share a template which has everything well stipulated there. This is just to ensure that we understand once we see that template. So you use the consistent rating scale because in order to calculate risks, we have to look at the threat multiplied by the vulnerability divided by the capacity. In rating in the scale, the threats could either be very low, low, moderate, high, very high, or severe. That's the first step that we look at. Then the second step is how do we calculate the risks? The risks, like I already said, it's the capacity score. So the threat score multiplied by the vulnerability score divided by the capacity score. Once you see the template, it's going to be easier to understand. Once we have calculated the risk, the next thing to do is to interpret the risk score. How do we interpret it? Now we look at the different components, the score, and the reasons for the threats. Once you look at all of this, it's easy to understand in the template how the various risks are understood. The next thing we're going to be looking at is how to conduct a risk assessment. Now, in order to conduct a risk assessment, there are 5 steps that we have to follow. The first thing is to identify the risk at hand. The risk might be towards you or your community. This risk could happen during an event that you plan, or even during a campaign, or even at your office during a meeting. Once we have identified the risk and exactly where it takes place, the next thing to do, we have to analyze the risk. And this is by assessing how likely it is going to happen and what would be the impact if this risk were to occur. Once we analyze the risk, the next thing we do is to evaluate the risk. Now, since there might be many risks, including things that we cannot control, we need to evaluate and prioritize risks to check which ones we want or we need to mitigate first, what we need to prioritize. Once you have evaluated the risks, the next thing we need to do is to mitigate these risks. And how do we mitigate these risks? By defining and implementing measures against these risks. Once we have defined clear measures that we can implement against these risks, the next thing we do is monitor and review how successful the mitigation measures were. Now, if you look at this slide, you see that once you have gone to monitor and review, then the arrow points us back to mitigating risk. This is because the risk situations may change and we might need to add completely new risk mitigation methods to be able to mitigate any further risks that come up. That's in a nutshell how we conduct a risk assessment. Now, after looking at how we conduct the risk assessment, it's important to look at the tools and methodologies for conducting a risk assessment, an effective risk assessment. Now, how do we start? Now, there are many different tools and methodologies that can help when we create a risk assessment. So, this list is not extensive, and there are other ways to approach risk assessments, but this is what we at CAD think that is important for human rights defenders or activists to know. The first thing is brainstorming. Generally, we recommend that by yourself or in a group where everyone should be able to share their thoughts on potential risks. So we brainstorm about what could be the potential risks that we could be facing. After we do this brainstorming, the next thing to do is mind mapping. Mind mapping is similar to brainstorming, but this is more visual and can be used to show interconnections between risks. Once you have done mind mapping, then we go ahead to conducting interviews with experts. Now, when we talk about experts, what do we mean? It just means that you should identify someone who is an expert in a particular topic and interview them in order to feed into your risk assessment. So, for example, maybe you want to do a protest and there's someone in your community or in a different organization who has much more experience with protests. That person in this regard can be considered as an expert because they have much more experience with this particular topic. So, we recommend to have conversations with them to learn best practices. The next thing is desk research. We recommend to read articles, reports by human rights organizations, news, because all of these can inform your risk assessment as it helps you to understand the context further. The final thing to do in conducting your risk assessment is a SWOT analysis. You have to analyze the situation by identifying your strengths or your organization's strengths, what the weaknesses would be, what the opportunities are, and what the threats are. All of these tools then feed into what is called a risk matrix. Most common used tools for personal risk assessment in the human rights space because we evaluate the likelihood and impact of the consequences. So this is what a risk matrix is. There's an example of a risk matrix which I'm going to show, but before that, if you look at this diagram, you see that diagram which has the green, the yellow, and the pink coloring. Now, you see the likelihood and the consequences. So, the lower the likelihood, the lower the consequence, and the higher the likelihood, the higher the consequence. So, when you're performing a risk assessment, you have to always look at your likelihood. How high is your likelihood? Then you have to know that if your likelihood is high, then your risk level is the consequence of this means that your risk level is going to be very high, and vice versa. If your likelihood is very low, then the consequence of this means that your risk level is quite low. Now I'm going to be sharing an example of a risk matrix. This is an example which could be broken down in different columns as you have seen here. And at the end of this, I think you're going to be able to have the link to a template to this risk matrix template, which you can tailor to your own personal use. This is an example of what we would ask in case we need a risk assessment for ourselves, right, or for our organizations. The first thing is to ask yourself, what's the risk category? What could harm you or your community? And how and why could this harm you or your community? What is the driving factor for this? What is the probability or the likelihood of this risk occurring? When you look at this diagram, you see that especially the questions around likelihood and impact are very subjective. But for likelihood, some research can be done. For example, the history of repression and actions against defenders in similar situations. What will be the impact on me if this risk happens, for example? What can we do to reduce the likelihood or impact? This diagram or this illustration can seem intimidating in the beginning, but remember that you are the expert of your own situation. You know your context better. And so things your government does, for example, or the various stakeholders do or adversaries, you know exactly what might work against you in each situation. So we recommend that this risk matrix should always be tailored to your particular situation. Now ask yourself what informs your risk assessment. That's something important that we should ask ourselves as activists. We have an example which I will show also. We have to ask ourselves a lot of questions to ensure that we have everything in mind that we should consider when we are trying to form our risk matrix. Because it's important to know that we can never cover everything. So it's good to always do this process together, maybe one or two or three people, so that each person's idea forms a basis for a risk that you could potentially be facing. The example I will show you here might sound super dry and maybe basic or very confusing, but doing a risk assessment is a matter of taking the time to think through an action, an event, travel, whatever it may be. So let's look at what it looks like when we fill it in. This is not a real event, this is just an example. that we came up with so that we could all look at it. So if you look at this, for example, under the risk category, we have this one of the categories is safety and security. And the example there is an arrest at an action. Now, what's the risk that's identified here is the local police will come to a protest arena or area and arrest activists involved in action. So, like I mentioned in the previous slide, you see that there's the likelihood and there's the impact. So, once you put on the likelihood, say it's a 4 on 5, what's the likelihood that you can get arrested? How impactful is this? The impact is high. Now you see that it gives you a very high intrinsic risk figure. Now, how can you mitigate this risk? By maybe depending on your specific context, getting a protest permit, upfront communication with the authorities, change your format of protest, whatever it takes. If you use this mitigating measure, what's going to be the impact? The impact, for example, here will be that all activists have a number of local lawyers or incident response hotline. Activists body up together, so like they're in pairs, they have a check-in plan, they have an emergency contact. Now you see that when you use this mitigating measure, the impact is better, and so you see that the likelihood dropped from a 4 to a 3, and the impact dropped from a 6 to a 4, and so overall the residual risk has dropped to a 12. So you see that mitigating factors help to make the residual risk lower. So these are just examples which you could go through to see, to understand. Now, the next thing we'll be looking at is safety kits and tools. It's important to know that building capacity for physical security and legal preparedness is very important. And these are the ways in which we can build this. This is aimed at equipping us, human rights defenders, with the knowledge and tools that we need to protect ourselves physically and legally while we engage in advocacy, while we document our work or our activism. The first thing under safety kits and tools that we'll be looking at is physical security safety kits. We broke them up into three different categories. The first thing is the personal safety kit, which should be portable. This is ideal for individuals during field works, protests, or site visits and should contain a minimum of the following. So, for example, you should have a basic first aid kit, which includes bandages, pain reliefs, antiseptics. You should have an emergency whistle or personal alarm, which can be very useful in case you find yourself in trouble. It's important to have flashlights, preferably solar or rechargeable, so that even if there's no electricity, you have lighting. It's important to have a power bank in your personal safety kit so that your phone stays charged. Protective face masks and eye goggles, especially for protests, in case of tear gas or whatever. It's very important to have a water bottle with water purification tablets if possible, depending on where you are, if you're not sure about how potable the water is. It's important to have snacks. We recommend protein bars because they keep us energized. It's important to have identification documents. So, like you have a laminated copy of your ID, your passport, whatever it is you use as an identification document. It's important to have an emergency contact card, I would say, where you have a few numbers of emergency contacts. You could also consider having a pepper spray or non lethal personal defense tools, subject to your local laws, what works in your local context. And also have a notebook and pen for recording incidents or taking quick notes. Note that all of these things are subjective based on your individual context. Now, the second category is office or home kits. This is useful for defenders working from a consistent location in case of any attacks or any issues. It's important for your home or office kits to have a fire extinguisher, a first aid kit, just like the personal safety kit, to have solar powered or hand crank radio, backup battery, power bank or inverter, to have a CCTV or motion sensor system where if someone breaks in, it's possible to review footage, to have an emergency evacuation map for your office or your home. It's important to have multiple flashlights with extra batteries in your office and in your home. It's important to have your doors and windows security reinforcement. This is very important. It's also good to have a fire blanket in case of a fire and your specific context. Have a spare phone or SIM card in your office or in your house in case of anything. Have a small amount of cash reserve for emergency use. And also very important to have an emergency response number visibly posted. Number or numbers depending on your context and what is available to you. The third category under physical security safety kit is the vehicle emergency kit. This is especially important for mobile defenders. The content of this should be a reflective vest and road triangle, a tow rope and jumper cables in case your car has issues, basic toolkits, printed maps and GPS backup, mobile phone holders for hands free use in case of anything, emergency blankets and rain ponchos in case you find yourself where it's raining, extra fuel if it's legal in your context and safe. So you could have it like in a can in your boot, medical and first aid supplies, photocopies of important documents, portable fire extinguishers for your vehicles. This is the first section for the safety kits and tools, which focuses on the physical. Now we are going to be going to the second section, which focuses on digital security tools. So, although the focus is physical and legal, human rights defenders must protect their devices as well. For example, Signal, Wire, or WhatsApp use these because they have encrypted communication. Use Proton Mail for secure emails. It's important to have strong passwords and use password managers like Bitwarden. It's important to use VPN like Proton VPN, Molvad, and others. Please remember to have two factor authentication tools, secure cloud storage for all your encrypted backups. Also, have a Faraday bag to block tracking of devices where necessary. These are all the things that we cover under digital security tools. Next part we'll go to is the legal preparedness kit. What is the legal preparedness kit? This legal preparedness kit has to contain legal safety documents, response plan for arrest or harassment, and legal tools and apps. Now, the first one, which is legal safety documents, we recommend that these documents should have printed copies and digital copies, and this should include a copy of your national constitution provisions on rights, on what your rights are, a list of local and international human rights laws relevant to human rights defenders, emergency contacts of lawyers or legal organizations, and maybe a know your rights one pager which has bullet points on arrest, detention, and whatever situation you find yourself in. It's also important to have an affidavit or legal representation letter which is pre authorized if it's applicable in your local context so that it's easy to use in case of any issues. The next thing is a response plan for arrest or harassment. It's important to inform a pre-arranged legal contact so that if you get harassed or arrested, you're able to reach out to them immediately. Have a message protocol. For example, you can have a code word or a phrase that if you send to this contact, they understand that you're in trouble. Carry written instructions for those with you. What to do if you are detained, if you're in a group. It's important to carry written instructions. Keep a logbook or digital backup of any threats, intimidation, or abuses. Because in most cases, when you reach out to support from protection organizations, they request these threats or evidence of these threats and intimidations or abuse. The third thing is the legal tools and apps. Know your rights tools. It's important to know that apps and digital platforms that educate human rights defenders on their rights under national and international law are many of them. And so I'll give you a few recommendations. For example, we have Amnesty International's Know Your Rights Guide. It's mobile friendly and it's a PDF form and it's per country, so you can download that of your countries. The second tool is the Legal Empowerment Network NAMATI. It's a community legal education resource, very important for human rights defenders. We also have Haki Check, for example, for Kenya, which helps users understand rights during police stops and arrests. We also have Rights Info for UK-based adaptable defenders. Human rights explained simply and legally through this. Now, key features that you should take note of are offline access to legal rights, information tailored to arrest, detention, protest rights, and search and seizure in case you get searched or things get seized from you. It's also important to take note of simple legal language and visual aids because these are very useful. There are also some mobile apps for documenting human rights violations safely and securely. For example, we have Teller app, which is an end-to-end encrypted documentation and data collection app. The Teller is Tella. It can also hide itself on the phone and work offline. We also have the Eyewitness to Atrocities by IBA. It's a secure app which uploads photos, videos, audios with metadata to a cloud archive protected by legal protocols. It's also a chain of custody and it preserves potential legal proceedings. We also have Camera V, which is an archived app and is replaced by Proof Mode. We also have Obscura Cam, which automatically blurs faces and removes metadata from photos and videos. Now, this all these apps have legal value, and their legal value preserves the chain of evidence. It ensures credibility in court and maintains safety and anonymity. Now, after looking at the legal preparedness kit, we are now going to move to the safety planning checklist, which is just a checklist for demonstration. It's important to know that safety is not a one time task, but it's a constant practice. So, regularly reviewing and updating safety kits, tools, and contact is very important. And human rights defenders like us are powerful change agents. So, our protection is critical to sustaining the movement. So, here is a checklist of things that we could do constantly to ensure our safety is well taken care of by our actions and the things that we do. Now we are going to be looking at most common legal risks that we face as activists. The first thing is arbitrary arrest and detention. Human rights defenders are often arrested without due process, and a lot of times it's on vague or fabricated charges. For example, disturbing public order, illegal assembly, spreading false information, etc. These illegal charges definitely have mitigating measures. How do we mitigate this arbitrary arrest and detention? The first thing is to know your rights. It's important to maybe carry and memorize a rights summary card for your jurisdiction. Have legal representation. It's important to establish pre-arranged contact with a lawyer or legal aid organization. The third thing is emergency protocols. It's important to inform trusted contacts before any high risk activities. So you could use check in or check out systems, whatever works best for your situation. It's important to carry essentials like copies of your ID, your medical information, your legal aid contact on you. It's very essential. And also document arrest. If possible, record or ask witnesses to record the event safely. But also avoid being alone. It's important to attend potentially risky actions like protests, field visits, etc., with a partner or support team. The second form of legal risks that activists always face is criminalization of human rights work. Now, authorities may target human rights defenders by labeling them as terrorists, foreign agents, or threats to national security. This can result in surveillance, charges, bans, or even imprisonment. Now, how can this situation be mitigated? The first thing is legal clarity. It's important to understand laws on terrorism, national security, and foreign funding in your country. Second mitigating factor is transparency. Please maintain clear records of activities, funding, sources, and communications. The third mitigating measure is building alliances. It's important for activists to collaborate with legitimate, recognized networks locally and internationally for their security and safety, so that in times of criminalization or of their work, they are able to reach out to these allies. The next measure is legal defense funds. It's important to prepare or contribute to an emergency fund to cover legal costs in the event where criminalization and arrest may occur. It's important also to have public messaging. Please frame your work consistently within the human rights framework to avoid misinterpretation by government or all the stakeholders or adversaries. We move forward to the next part, which is defamation, libel, and slander charges. This is another form of legal risk that a lot of activists face. A lot of activists face lawsuits for publishing reports, statements, or allegations against powerful actors. And this is a very serious thing. And so the mitigating measures that could follow include verifying sources. It's important to rigorously fact check all public statements or reports before you publish them. Please consult legal counsel. We recommend that human rights defenders review sensitive publications with a legal advisor before release. We also recommend to use disclaimers all the time. It's important to clearly state when information is based on witness testimony pending verification. We also have a right to reply as a mitigating measure. Where appropriate, allow those accused in reports a chance to respond before you publish these reports. Because sometimes they might have a different narrative, which might be the right narrative. We recommend to collect evidence as much as possible. Keep documentation and communication records for all sources and statements that you make. The fourth category is restrictions on freedom of assembly and association, which is one of the most common. Authorities may deny permits, declare gatherings illegal, or criminalize organizations and individuals because of protests. How do we mitigate this? The first thing is to know your local laws and know them well. Please understand procedures for lawful assembly and protest. The second mitigating factor is legal observers. We recommend to involve accredited legal observers in public gatherings when possible. We recommend to have written permission. If you require for your particular context, apply for permits and retain documentation throughout the protest. Please train participants. We recommend to provide a KYR, which is Know Your Rights training before events, so that all those who participate in protests or events are conscious and aware of what their rights are and they know how to react in the event of arrest or anything. And the last thing is document events. We recommend to record peaceful behavior and document any disproportionate state response to peaceful protests. The next thing we'll be looking at is targeting through cyber law and digital regulations. This is another common legal risk that human rights defenders face. A lot of times, human rights defenders can be charged under vague cybercrime laws for online expression, for criticizing authorities, or sharing sensitive information. How do we mitigate this kind of situations? The first thing is digital literacy. We recommend to train defenders in legal and secure digital communication. The second thing is anonymous posting. Please use platforms that allow safe, anonymous speech when necessary. We recommend to avoid trigger words. Please understand language that may be criminalized under national law. So you need to know your legal context, your local context, and the legal context as well. Use encrypted tools. Communicate through platforms like Signal, ProtonMail, and VPNs to avoid surveillance. Legal guidance. We recommend to consult legal experts before publishing sensitive digital content on any campaign or protest or any activity at all. The next risk is travel bans and restrictions. A lot of times, human rights defenders are prevented from traveling, especially internationally, to attend conferences or report on abuses. How can we mitigate this kind of situation? The first thing is to know your rights. Familiarize yourself with legal remedies for travel bans. The second thing is legal challenges. It's important to work with legal teams to challenge arbitrary restrictions where necessary and where they occur. We also recommend remote engagement. Please use virtual platforms to attend events when travel is blocked. The next thing is international support. It's important to engage the international community, international organizations to advocate for your mobility rights as a human rights defender. We also recommend to document the ban. In case you get banned, record the reason, the duration, and process of any travel restriction that you are facing. The next legal risk that human rights defenders often face is restrictive NGO or foreign funding laws. Laws may limit foreign funding or force NGOs to register under restrictive categories like foreign agents, for example. This is very common, especially in the global south, and there are various ways to mitigate this. The first thing is compliance checks. It's important to regularly review your legal obligations as an organization for registration and reporting. Have transparent accounting. It's important to maintain clear, accessible financial and programmatic records. Diversify your funding. We recommend to explore domestic or anonymous funding where appropriate and legal. Also, have legal review of grants. It's important to have all funding agreements reviewed by legal counsel to ensure that there are no loopholes. And finally, advocacy. We recommend to work with coalitions to push back against restrictive laws at the national and international levels. The next legal risk that activists often face is confiscation of property and freezing of assets. A lot of times, governments seize bank accounts, shut down offices, or confiscate the tools that activists use, like laptops and phones. These have mitigating measures. The first thing is data backups. Secure all sensitive data in encrypted offsite backups. We recommend to separate accounts. Keep your personal accounts totally and completely independent and separate from your organizational accounts or funds. Always have legal documents ready. It's important to prepare the paperwork to contest seizures and request item returns in cases where these items are seized. Keep all digital copies of all your documents. You can store scanned copies of key legal documents securely. We also recommend asset protection plans. What does this mean? Work with legal experts on how to protect essential organizational resources. It's important to note that legal repression is increasingly subtle and systemic. Therefore, we need to be prepared. That's the only way we can best resist. Being legally informed, having access to counsel, documenting everything, and building collective defense mechanisms are critical to ensuring that human rights defenders can continue their work with integrity and resilience. Now, after looking at all of these legal risks, the final thing we'll look at is how to build a safety culture. These are just a few points to encourage us as human rights defenders to remember that we have to build a safety culture for ourselves, for our communities, for our groups, and for our organizations. Please encourage incident reporting. No matter how small an incident is, it's important that it should be reported so that due process is followed in the event where there are escalations following. We recommend to assign field safety focal persons, especially for activists who go on the field. Please have regular trainings for your group, for your organization. Don't say we had a training last month. No, you could decide to say quarterly we have refresher trainings or twice yearly. Just try to have refresher trainings. This is very important. It's important to have local leader coordination. Where communities are involved, it's important for communities to have local leaders who coordinate things on the ground and report to the NGOs or the stakeholders that they work with. It's important to have conflict sensitive engagement strategies where you are sure that whatever you do, the work you do, even if you're in a conflict zone, or even if there's conflict within your community, your organization, there are strategies that you put in place that can survive irrespective of this conflict. Thank you.
Before we close today's session, I want to remind you that you're not alone in this work. Protecting ourselves and our communities can feel overwhelming, but there are resources and people ready to support you. If you are a climate justice activist or any human rights defender and find yourself in urgent need of help, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can contact us directly through the email, Signal, or WhatsApp numbers displayed on this slide. Even if we might not be able to provide direct assistance, we can refer you to our trusted partners and networks who specialize in different kinds of support, whether it's legal aid, digital security help, psychosocial care, or emergency relocation. Your safety and well being matter deeply, so please bookmark these contacts and share them with your peers in need. Activism is a journey we take together. So remember, reaching out is a sign of strength.